Hello, we are the group C's Get Degrees and welcome to our video series on our part creation process. We will start with this part. All our parts were made in MMGS. The part started with a sketch on the front plane. We created an 80 by 40 millimeter rectangle with its bottom midpoint on the origin. We then made a vertical center line bisecting the rectangle and then made a 27.5 millimeter vertical slot on the left side. The slot has a radius of 2.5 mm and its guideline is 5 mm from the top left corner. This slot was mirrored across the center line. Then we made a horizontal slot 5 mm under the top of the rectangle with the same dimensions as the other one. This slot was centered on the center line. We then extruded this sketch 5 mm forward and then made 5 mm radius fillets on the top corners. Then we countersunk two M4 holes 15 and 25 mm from the bottom. Finally, we added this center line as a reference for assembly. We chose 27.5 mm as the length of the slots because the fabric straps we ordered were an inch thick. An inch translates to roughly 25.4 mm, but we added extra space to allow for slight movement. We decided to make these slots 5 mm thick so that we could thread the fabric through them for sewing. The slots could have been placed closer to the edges, but were placed 5 mm away from the edges so that the tension from the fabric would not snap the part after assembly. Only the top two corners are filleted. This was intentional. We intended a different part to be designed flush to the bottom, hence why not all corners are filleted in the final part. This part started out on the right plane with a 40 by 60 rectangle with its bottom left corner at the origin. Then we converted the right edge into a center line and formed a triangle on the right side. The rightmost edge is 30 degrees away from the center line. A 27.5 mm long vertical slot with a radius of 2.5 mm was created near the left side. The slot is 5 mm away from the top left corner. A horizontal slot with the same dimensions was created 5 mm under the top side of the rectangle. This slot is 25 mm away from the left side of the rectangle. A final slot was created parallel to the right edge of the triangle. This slot has the same dimensions as the other ones. It is located 5 mm away from the bottom edge and 5 mm away from the right edge. This sketch was extruded 5 mm rightwards and then 5 mm radius fillets were created on the outer corners. The top slot was originally intended for another strap. Our original design had an additional strap that would go over the top of the user's head. Upon completing our first prototype, we realized that this strap would be useless, so discarded the plan without redesigning the part. The slot on the back is angled such that the attached strap will wrap downwards around the user's head. This design was implemented such that the strap would go under the part on the skull known as the occipital protuberance, preventing the head mount from sagging forwards. This part started on the top plane. A 50 mm horizontal center line was drawn with its leftmost corner on the origin, and then a 70 mm vertical center line was connected to the other end. A tangent arc was drawn between the ends and then was connected to a second tangent arc with 1 mm of space in between. This sketch was extruded upwards 25.4 mm. This and the other straps are not entirely to scale with the real product because the real one is designed to stretch to the size of the user's head. A 1 by 25.4 mm rectangle was drawn on the top plane with its bottom left corner on the origin. A 90 mm horizontal center line was drawn to the right of the origin. Then a vertical center line was attached to the end in order to create an axis of revolution. The rectangle was revolved 180 degrees across this axis of revolution in order to create the part. A 25.4 by 1 mm rectangle was drawn on the top plane. Another sketch was created on the right plane starting at the origin. This consists of a series of connected center lines. These center lines serve as guide points for a spline. The original rectangle was then swept across this spline to finish the part. In the final assembly, this strap does properly connect with the other strap. This disconnect is unintentional because the real product has the straps sewn together at the back. However, we were unable to elegantly connect these parts in SolidWorks. This part starts on the front plane with a 60 by 40 rectangle coming from the origin. This rectangle was extruded forwards 30 millimeters. The frontmost edge then had centerlines sketched onto it. A 10 millimeter diameter circle was sketched tangent to the midpoint of the rectangle. Another 10 millimeter diameter circle was sketched to the right with its midpoint 15 millimeters away from the midpoint of the rectangle. This circle was mirrored across the center. These 3 circles were then cut 5 millimeters deep. The rectangle was filleted 2 ways, then chamfered 10 millimeters and 45 degrees on the top edge. A 20 millimeter long horizontal slot was centered on this chamfered edge, then was cut 1 millimeter deep. Finally, 2 lines were sketched onto the back edge. These lines have their midpoints aligned with the midpoints of the top and right edges. Note that there are no holes for screws or bolts. The final product was attached with hot glue. This part is also not entirely accurate to the final product, but is merely an approximation.